lovely introduction from David. Before I start the presentation, it is fabulous to be here. It's fabulous to see what the HTCs have become, and it's a chance over the next 2 days to acknowledge that the HTCs have become what they are because of what you guys have done. NIHR have listened to what is possible. They've listened to the needs of industry. They've listened to the needs of the country and the economy, and they have developed that. If that sort of notional graph there of the evolution. So I'm a geneticist by background, but that evolution of the concept and the funding that came with it. It's an acknowledgement of your hard work, but also the vision and knowing what the right thing to do to help industry is. NIHR have listened to that. They haven't come up with it themselves. They've basically used what you guys have created. And I think that's a model for future work. It'll be a theme we'll come back to. But there's one other thing as well that David and V are incredibly modest about. There's a style of leadership here and a way of working that is complementary to the system, that is it's visionary in that it's not all about the people who are leading. It's about what they do and the effect they can have on the system. And I don't think you guys quite understand how good you are at that, but it's to your credit, and I think it shows in what you've managed to achieve. But it also, I think it's a theme that's coming through in terms of how we move the North forward and how we reach out and reach across organisations and boundaries, because the other theme of this is we really need to do that. We need a more inclusive, more collaborative system that takes us forward. And that's part of what we do at the Northern Health Science Alliance. We try to encourage that. We try to create an environment where that can happen. So roughly speaking, there isn't actually a title for my presentation today. I'm not quite sure why that is. I think it didn't trust me to stick to it anyway. But I think if there was one, it's that idea when you win a big grant or you win a big award, there is that sort of 6-week period where you go, what the hell have we just promised to deliver, right? And how do we go about that? Well, I'm going to take it to a bigger context here today, and we're going to look at some of the broader northern stuff, and we're going to look at what the scale of the opportunity is, particularly working with industry to grow the northern economy, and why we need to do that, and how that visionary leadership and cluster building is important. But also the size of the task, and I'm going to show you some fairly shocking figures in terms of the public sector funding gap to the north. But first, you've got to listen to the official NHSA bit, which is what we are as an alliance. So we've got all the big teaching hospitals and all the big research active universities, and we are tasked, we have a mandate from them, and we have some funding from them, a membership funding, to do two things on their behalf. One is to convene where it's appropriate to do so across the north in areas of excellence, and Julia very clearly set out, there's no point whinging about not getting enough funding. We've got to put forward aspirational excellence that can do something for the country. Then we hold people's feet to the fire to fund that. That's the trick here. But we've got a mission across the NHSA on behalf of those organisations to bring people together, unlocking the combined potential. Inherent in that is working together, being collaborative, reaching out to people, and being everybody winning. The vision, we will never fix the health gap in the north, the healthy life expectancy between the north and south. We will never fix that by changing our health service. We can only fix that by the 80% of our health that is other life chances. It's the economy. It's good jobs. It's better housing. It's better access to care, true, but it's also a healthier lifestyle, and that is incredibly closely linked to income. We will not change the health of the north just by fixing them when they're sick. We have to change the economy. That's why the industry links that NIHR have since its inception built in are so important in this. We need to create an ecosystem. We need to create an environment where we grow jobs and opportunities for the people of the north. That's the vision, a healthy and prosperous north driven by access to opportunity. And the health sector and the health tech sector and the academic sector are incredibly important ways to do that, because innovation and research drive the economy. It's always been the case. Our role in the NHSA, as I say, is high quality convening and advocacy. So we convene in various areas. In each one of these areas, there is excellence in the north. In each one of these areas, there are isolated pockets of excellence in universities and trusts and industry across the north. Our job is to bring them together. You can do that just for its own sake, or you can do it with a purpose. Our purpose is to bring people together so that when opportunities arise, they already know each other. There's nothing worse than getting a big opportunity and then having to build a consortium. That'll never work, not on the scale of writing grants. The trick is to build the consortia, to build the relationships, to build trust, and have leadership that does that. Only by doing that do you then have a fighting chance when the call comes. If you're scrabbling around for partners with 6 weeks to put in an expression of interest, it ain't going to work. And the chances are that a big, really big institution somewhere in the southeast will have all those people on the same corridor. Right? That's the challenge in the north, is to join it up in time to have the opportunity. So that's what we do in these areas, and some of them they're all strategically important, economically important, and there's excellence in the north. The links between them are profound. The links between medtech and data, you can't do medtech without data, with good access to data. We need to improve the data links to help the medtech, advanced therapies, and the clinical trials infrastructure, absolutely profound. We need to make sure that those links are there and people are talking to each other. And that's what we mean by convening. The other thing that, in terms of convening, that's really important, and a theme of this is the concept of a cluster. David used the phrase earlier on. So what is a cluster? That's it can operate at many levels. You can have the Oxford Road cluster. You can have the health tech cluster in West Yorkshire. You can have the aging cluster in Newcastle. You can have whatever it is. But you also have that can become very parochial if you're not careful. I think the whole concept of a cluster is to outward looking. That there's a very broad sense, and I think Julia captured that. That there are these activity clusters within the north that are really, really important. But there's also a view from government and internationally that the north of England operates has potential as a cluster in its own right. But that's a different purpose from the medtech cluster and the work that they do. But what you need to drive that is the same. You need leadership. You need these components. You need innovators, capital. You need companies. You need government input, universities, and for health tech, you need a very strong NHS engagement. So those elements, whether you're working at West Yorkshire level, working at Oxford Road level, or working North of England level, or UK level, those things all have to be mobilised. Some of them are better mobilised at, if you're talking about access to capital, which we will be this afternoon, there's no point trying to do that just for West Yorkshire or just for Oxford Road. That's where Gritstone come in and people and investors come in, where it needs to be, that message and opportunity needs to be on a much bigger footprint. So there are some things need to be done locally, there are some things need to be done collectively. And where it needs to be done across at North of England level, we're there to help. And this is work that Ben Martin's done in pulling this together. There are equivalent clusters across the rest of the UK. So you stack it up another level. And that's a very, something weird's happened there. You can also stack this up internationally. What happened to the map? I have no idea. So we take the message about Northern excellence internationally to partners that seek to engage with us. Ben was down talking to the Greek government last week, and making it clear that there are these assets like the HRCs and the other infrastructure and the areas of excellence across the world. That message is getting out there, and there are inward investments coming in on the back of that. We also, our main obsession is influencing our own government for reasons that I'll come to in a minute, right? It's been a fairly chaotic 4 years. That's not just down to COVID. It was naturally chaotic to start with, I think. But they have this idea of clusters in their heads. So there was a consultation and the levelling up about clusters for investment. And we worked with some of the other national like Harani in Northern Ireland and MedCity in London to put together what we thought that how clusters could work at regional and super-regional level. And we also worked, and and a lot of those recommendations you'll see in what the government have done on clusters. We've also worked, got our own house in order, and we've got the 11 LEPs to stand up together in support of life sciences investment, and put in a bid to the Comprehensive Spending Review, which ended up being about furlough, which was great timing, because they didn't really invest in anything much except furlough that year. But this idea of a northern supercluster where there's connectivity across the north and there's preferential investment by government in assets in the north so that we can move the dial in our economy, right? That's the argument. That will continue to be the argument, is that preferential investment in excellence like medtech, data and AI, advanced therapies and things like that is needed and is warranted. Some government agencies and arm's length bodies like NIHR have kind of got this, and we've seen the BRCs get a bit more money. We've seen the clinical trials units get a bit more money. We now have full coverage of the ARCs and so forth. So NIHR, and it's not just because Ian's here that I'm giving credit, that's actually real, but it also goes into the DNA of NIHR that they want to see more research done closer to the communities that are most in need. The rest of government hasn't heard that yet, and they need to. So that's the kind of the clusters idea. So we spend a lot of time mapping the activity, and every time you do one of these graphs, you fall out with a different part of the community. Why is that not on Teesside? But the headline figures are that if the North got the same per capita funding from public sector sources as the rest of the country, we would increase productivity by about 16 billion. We would create probably 100,000 high-paid jobs over the next 20 years. That's a very, very low. That estimate is very much on the low side. So those extra 100,000 well-paid jobs are the types of opportunities that give people life chances that improve health of families and communities, and the supply chain and all of that stuff that goes into a robust economy. That's the sort of, and that's only by getting a fair chance, not getting special treatment. And what I mean by a fair chance is more investment from government, which triggers more private sector investment. This is a really dull Whitehall system. It's how they see it's DCIT have produced their idea of a clusters map. So they've taken all the information they have on facilities, funding, and all the rest, and they've basically stuck at the back end of a database, and you can filter it by lots of things. So I'm just saying, I'll give you the link because I think it's really important that the health and academic system understand how government think. A lot of our ideas on what drives clusters is in here, right? But this drives behaviour in Whitehall. It is. I know you're all scientists, and I know you just want to move on to the next shiny thing. That's what we do, right? But you really do need to know the environment you work in, and the way government are thinking about clusters. When you look at these, this is a kind of a life sciences cluster map, and it's completely meaningless. But it's driven by the data and the insights that they're using to drive funding. And if you, again, not really come through, but you can filter it for medtech, basically is what I'm saying. And it's actually quite interesting to do it, but you do have to stick with it. The thing that struck me was, if you look at the investment zones around health and life sciences, it's not driven by this, but it's consistent with it. There is no investment zone that is not a blob on that map, a fairly prominent blob. So whatever the next thing is going to be influenced by that. These are how are we doing? Okay. We did start 10 minutes late. Yeah. Okay, so again, thanks to Ben Martin for this work, but every 4 years the government publish figures on public sector investment, right, by sectors like life sciences and so forth. 4 years ago we did an analysis and it was absolutely shocking. So we repeated the analysis 4 years later, and guess what? It's exactly the same. the figures, the absolute figures they're hard to imagine because you don't really want. But the public sector investment in the north, collectively for our domain, was 405 million. It was well over 3 times that across London, Oxford, and Cambridge. Right now, we know that there's a need for infrastructure in London, Oxford, and Cambridge. Nobody's disputing that, and I will never say that we should defund those areas. But if we are to have a fighting chance of growing our economy, we need a fighting chance in this. Right? So per capita, that would be 25 quid a head every year for the north, but it's 68 quid a head for every resident in London and the southeast. Right? If you do that for long enough, like for 30 years, you end up with a completely different economic base. If you keep doing it, you reinforce that disadvantage. And that, we think we've got to break that. We thought levelling up was that. We thought we would at least start to see that change. But levelling up, the gap has narrowed by about 2%, right? At the current rate of change, we wouldn't have the same income per head until about 2082, when all of us will have ceased caring. I'm not even saying we need to completely level the figures, but we do need, all the evidence is that we need more infrastructure and more opportunity in the north. There's real damage being done. We're going to look at projects, infrastructure, and talent as the 3 areas. So you're going to get these slides, and the reports on our website. But if you look at by combined authority, the figures are these are the components that give you the headline figure. But in direct funding awards for the research projects, you look at Greater Manchester being the most heavily funded, and it's still about 1/3 of London per head. Tees Valley, if you're in Tees Valley, you're looking at a factor of 10 or 30 less per head. And some of that is down to the amount of activity, but this is either a virtuous or a vicious circle, whichever you choose to believe. If you look at the infrastructure, this is buildings. Okay, shorthand. There are the bit that was picked up in the press was there are buildings in the southeast that get more funding, infrastructure funding each year than the whole of the north. Right, and that's just life sciences sector. If you look at other sectors like transport, Crossrail gets more money every year than transport in the north. There are tariffs in London NHS that are 4 times what you get paid for an operation up here. There are structural challenges here, and we should be getting more mad about it than we are, because the excellence in the north is not getting the oxygen that it needs. This is the one that, as an ex-scientist and lapsed scientist, I should say, the studentships thing, we do, the gap is narrower here. We're better at getting studentships and fellowships than we are at the really big money. And I like to think that's because we've got more chance earlier on. So the gap's different here. But it doesn't matter whether you look at the people, the research, or the infrastructure. We've got to fight back on this. We've got to put in better grants. We've got to put in more grants. We've got to collaborate more. And we've got to hold people to task around what is being funded. The risk is that the UK is hardwiring inequality and hardwiring structural advantage. That's the political argument we need to make. That in no way denigrates the excellence that is in the north. It in no way changes what we need to do or how we need to behave, but it needs to be ammunition for how we go about getting it. All right? That's too important for our region and the lives that we live to make it. So I'm going to just pause with this. What are you doing about it? Well, we're taking the argument, that advocacy piece that the NHSA do. We're taking that to the party conferences. We're taking it to the mayors. We're taking it to ministers. We're taking it. That's the advocacy piece we're trusted to do with the evidence that we have and the excellence we know about in the networks and the opportunities we know about. So we're making the case. That bottom one in the middle there. We had a round table at the Convention of the North where we had a selection of the northern mayors there. Tracy Brabin should have been in that photograph, but she was on the main stage launching the thing. So, but the mayors are determined that they're going to put their weight behind doing more in the north. If it can be done in the north, it should be done in the north. So if you've got diagnostics or tech things that the country need, build them in the north. Let's create the next big piece of infrastructure in the north. Let's make that case, and let's get our friends, our political friends, to do that for us. The other thing about that photograph that I will highlight is that that's Phil Wood in the middle, and he should have been here doing this talk. So he's up tomorrow. But Phil is a real asset in this. He's a chief executive who gets the issues. He's joined our board. That was his first gig, was to chair that as an NHSA director. And I think that there are some really, really forward-looking chief executives in the north. That's something that's an asset we have. We need to partner with them and solve problems for them. That's the way we'll get the airtime. And the other one on the right-hand side, so that's Andy Burnham and Oliver Coppard, who are very, very forward-thinking in what they're going to do about the health of citizens. We can use that. Tracy Braben as well. And that's Ben on the right, who did all the work that I, as chief executive, get to stand up here and butcher. But that's been a sort of a whistle-stop tour of the bigger environment within which the HTCs are absolutely exemplars of what we need to do and how we need to go about it. So thank you for the invite, if only to acknowledge the leadership style and the progressive approach that you guys are taking. Am I taking questions? No, it's not time, but I would be happy to, and I'm around the rest of the day. All right. Thanks, everybody.